Well, let's get started because I got a lot of stuff to go over. And then we have Bradley, who's going to go over, I think, something that's just extremely important. So tonight we meet. I've been shortening it down because I keep editing these videos and I'm dropping so much out of them. And I'm just trying, an hour is enough, right? So I cut this one back down to an hour. We should be able to get everything done within an hour. So we'll be out of here by 6 o'clock. Glad everybody showed up. San Diego Onshape Users Group. Bradley, how long have you been at Onshape?
So I've been at Onshape for 5 years now. 2016 is when I joined up.
Okay, all right. So you've been there for quite some time.
So well before sheet metal, PDM, all that good stuff you see today.
I've been with Onshape. I was one of the early testers. So I've been doing Onshape ever since there was Onshape. Basically bored to death, wanted to get into some new CAD, so that's how I started hanging out at Onshape. So let's get into it. We're going to have two topics tonight. We're going to talk about in context. I use in context all the time, but I started out with Pro Engineer, migrated over to SolidWorks, and then migrated over to Onshape. So in context was started by Pro Engineer, and it just followed over into SolidWorks and then followed over into Onshape. So I want to go over the history of in context, why is it so screwed up, and see if we can't clarify this a little bit. And then I'm going to have Bradley spend most of the day, most of the night, and talk about project structures. So when should you have a project structure? Basically when there's two of you, okay? So if you've got two people, you should be having some kind of a plan as to how everybody's going to be working together. And a project structure, even me, I use a particular structure when I'm putting stuff together, even though I'm working by myself. So he's got a really nice approach to get you started using some type of project structures, and we'll just go over where this can go, okay? And I'll let him, I'm not going to steal his thunder, so I'm going to talk about in context. So I think the best place to start with in context is to go look at the history of in context. And I'm not so sure how many people know where parametric CAD, parametric feature-based CAD started. And it basically started from this guy that's up on the screen. One guy, mathematician, supposedly worked here in San Diego, and had an idea and didn't work out where he was working, went to another place, didn't work out because they didn't want to change their database structure. Turns out PTC went bankrupt 3 times, and then all of a sudden, boom, they started taking off, okay? So basically, Sam Geisberg's the guy that started the idea of parametric feature-based solid modeling. And the first release was back in 1988. They got it out. John Deere, I believe, was one of the first customers and one of the people that actually kicked this thing off. This is when we joined PTC Pro Engineer. This was version 10, and this was just crazy amount of detail. This was very difficult for a computer to show. This ran on Unix workstations, Sun, Silicon Graphics, those types of things. That's when we started getting involved with PTC and working with Pro Engineer. On the early days, when it first came out in 1990 and 1988, we were selling CADKey, and we were trying to figure out how are we going to sell against Pro Engineer. And one of the problems with Pro Engineer in 1988 is it was all bottom up. The term bottom up wasn't there. It was just a parametric feature-based solid modeler. And you know, after you saw this shade and spin, I have a model, I'm spinning it around on the screen. How can you go back to wireframe? I mean, nobody wanted to do that, right? Everybody wanted to have the model spinning around on top of the screen. In fact, when we were selling Pro Engineer, it was mandated that you had a model up on your screen and spinning it within 5 minutes of people coming in through the door. because it was a very important part of people selling this stuff. One of the problems, though, is one of the ways that we sold against ProEngineer when it first came out was there was no concept of an engineering layout. And you could go into a room back in those days and you can say, yeah, you're going to take a bunch of parts, you're going to throw them into an assembly, and then you're going to build it. And the room would roar with laughter. Because typically what a design would do is you would start with what's called an engineering layout, and then you do your takeoffs and you would design your parts, and then you would create your assemblies and your sub-assemblies from that. But it always started together, and then you came out with your individual parts. PTC realized that issue, and in 1990, they came out with something called designing in the assembly. Okay, and that kind of shut us up, saying that, hey, you can't do parametric modeling with PTC. You can't do an engineering layout, okay? But what they ended up doing, keep in mind, computers didn't have a whole lot of RAM back then, and they had to be very efficient in how they did things. What they did was they just allowed you to edit in an assembly. So now we have this problem with how do I start the part? How do I design in an assembly when I don't have any parts? I mean, it's the chicken and the egg thing, you know, which comes first? And that's still the problem today. You know, do I start in an assembly or do I start in a part? And I think Onshape is trying to clear this up, right? They're trying to get us to start inside of a part studio, design all the related mated parts, and then eventually move into an assembly, okay? When I'm designing, I start the assembly, start the part studio, and I'm running them both simultaneously right from the get-go. And my job, what I like doing is I like getting into the assembly ASAP. But the problem with it's not really clear how to get started has been going on ever since the beginning of solid modeling. Just for historical purposes, in 1996, In Context was added to SolidWorks. SolidWorks 1995 didn't have it. So they ended up, and they started including it inside of here. And then in 2017, Onshape added In Context. That was 3 years after it got it started. So this is, I think people are trying to clean this up, but we still have this problem with what do I start with, in an assembly or parts, and how do I put them all together? So it's always been there, and it's always kind of an issue as to how do we get these things started. So let me go over some basic ideas on how to do cabling. So here's a robot, and right now I'm in an assembly because it's moving. So the basic construct is I imported this, and then I just put it all together, okay? I really like the assemblies inside of Onshape. I think they work really well. I also save all of the position. So here's the home position. This is position number 1. This is position number 2. And then this is position number 3. So all of these things are savable. If anybody out there has a UR3 robot in their laboratory and they're struggling with programming it, call me up, because what I want to do is I want to take all of these joint assignments and send them out to the robot. So basically you can set your robot up here and Onshape, click a button, and the robot actually moves to that position. That wouldn't be that difficult to do. Okay. So how do I create a cable? I have it in an assembly, and I have a part studio, but I want a cable that's associated with the two. So the way that I'm going to go about doing that is I'm going to create a brand new part studio. In the assembly, I like using the origin and constructing. There's something called assembling by coordinates, and that's basically just matching up all the origins. And it brings the part into my cable part. So now I'm going to create cable 2. And there's cable 2. If I come over here and try and create a cable, I can't pick anything. So one of the things that I end up doing is I take a reference and I bring it local. And the way that I bring it local is I'll offset a face. And we'll make it 0. Another face. Another face. Now these are my references that I'm going to be using to route my cable around here. And then we'll terminate based on this. Okay, so now I'm taking these faces, I'm creating an in-context reference. And at this point, I really don't need the robot. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and create my cable. And basically the way the cable works, I wrote this because I needed to do some cabling and I don't like doing cabling. So one of the things about cabling is that the z-axis points towards the cable. So let me change the direction of that. And now I'm going to route the cable. Now, the first and the last position where the cable is going to go, so it's going to go there. We'll go up to here. We'll go over to here. We'll go over to here. Go over to here. It really is hard to route a cable on the outside of a robot. That's kind of the point of this. Let's just pretend. I want to get going on this. Let's just pretend. So I'm going to loosen it up, and which basically allows the transition to go a little bit easier. Let's go there. And let's go ahead and terminate this thing. I'm just going to terminate to here for now. And there's my cable. Okay, so now I need to get the cable into my assembly. And because I'm designing by in context, I'll just insert it. Okay. So one of the things that's interesting is you can look at the cable length, and then if you change the position of the robot, robot changes, cable doesn't. Right mouse click, update context. Primary instance.
Did you insert the part? That might be the old cable.
No, it's the new cable. It's a set primary instance.
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to leave my opinions to myself. I don't think
Hey, I'm off the clock here.
I don't think primary instance is doing what it's supposed to do.
I
It's
have
more
my
annoying
thoughts as
than
well.
anything else.
Yeah.
We can go over what that is, but not right now. I'd rather get to you, Bradley. But notice here, you couldn't do this any other way, right? Here's the assembly. The assembly's moving around, but I need a part that's associated with the assembly, not with the part studio. And really, there's only one way to do this, and that is through an in-context relationship. So I've been doing this quite a bit. First off, I don't have a lot of in-context references, but when I do, I declare them and I make sure that they are workable. Do notice that this is one of the problems that we're having with robots, is that especially when you hang a cable on the outside, you have to go through all the frickin' positions and make sure that you don't rip that cable off, because the amount that it moves is tremendous. I mean, it's almost 150 millimeters difference. Okay. So this is an example. This is one small example of in-context design, and that is you can build, look, in context, to me, in context is confusing. In context with what? I like design in the assembly. Really what I'm doing is I'm designing a cable inside of the assembly. And then if I need to go back to the actual part, I'll double click the actual cable and it drags me back. I can come in here, I can do modifications here, and then I can go back and forth. And that's my typical workflow. As I'm in the assembly, I'll go in, I'll make modifications to the part, and then I go back in the other direction, okay? It's not that hard to do. It's not that hard to set it all up. Any questions? It's pretty powerful.
Instead of making separate cables, would you do like a configuration link to that instead, to each context?
If I'm doing multiple, look, because I'm lazy, I put all my cables in one cable part studio. So I actually have multiple cables. So if I have an assembly, last thing you do is you cable it up, right? And what I would do is then generate all of my cables. What's updating here, if you're going to run it with a configuration, no, I wouldn't use a configuration to create these, John, because they do update based on where the actual robot is. Typically, I'm not moving the top level assembly around when I'm actually cabling it up. But if it does move, I'll just store position 1 and position 2.
Oh, that's right. You're using the positions instead of configs.
Yeah. If you're going to be doing in context, and this is a Philip-ism, he said, before you create the in context, create the positions of where everything is so you can get back to that context. And that seems to be working out pretty well. I'm using named positions all the time.
And for complex assemblies, I'd argue too, display states just to hide certain things so it's not in your way when you're doing in context.
Yeah, starting to control all of this stuff gets a little busy, but I think that you can. One of the things that I do in my part studio, and I double click everything these days to get to it, is I manage this thing. What happens is you'll end up with 5 contexts and I don't remember what they were doing. And if I can't remember what it does, I delete it. And then, all of a sudden something goes away here. And most of the time I don't care. If I don't know what the context is, that means that I don't necessarily need it. But do watch this and do manage your context and make sure that they are doing something meaningful. They will grow. one of the things that you can't do is say, oh, well, what context was that? If I had 5 contexts, it's difficult to figure out, oh, well, this context is creating this arrow right here. So one of the ways that I remedy that problem is I just prune them and I keep them deleted. Typically, I'll only have 1 context, possibly 2 contexts in any type of part studio that I'm actually working with, or just have more part studios and 1 context per each part studio. Oh, you know what? Sorry, forgot to do this. I need to offset this. So this is cool because you can just get your offset. And of course, your cable will update based on the offset extensions. Okay. It's funny because I put this cabling routine, and 3 of the guys that have gotten the cable routine are doing robots. And try and wrap a cable on the outside of a robot and see how long that cable lasts. And they don't last very long. And the reason why is because you put it in, everything looks good, and then you go to a position and you stretch that cable. And it's more difficult than what you might think. All right. Bradley, take it away. Mesmerizes, my friend.
And to finish my thought to John in the chat, I mean, when you hover over that arrow, it says in context references anyway. Why not just give it the name that you named the in context?
I do.
That would be great.
Yeah.
That'd be really nice.
But, you know, in 6 months, what does the name mean? I get lost in all this stuff every so often.
Yeah.
It is something that you have to manage, though. You just can't let them grow.
What's
From
an
the ones
example
that
of
you're
where
not
you would,
using anymore.
what's
And
an
if you
example of
delete
where
all
you
the
even-
in-context references, the context stays there. It doesn't go away.
Evan.
I was saying, where's an example of where you'd even need more than like 3? I mean, I can see 2 if you have like a 2-position thing. But yeah, I've had, when I first started messing with it, I ended up having like 7 of them, you know, and no idea what each of them was for, because I was trying to keep it to like 1 idea per.
Yeah.
But really, like 1 position maybe of the
Yeah.
assembly, and it's okay because you can even hide and show stuff in the assembly and then jump back over to the context, and stuff that's hidden will still be referenced and it doesn't break. So yeah, 1 is almost always enough.
I think most of the time you can do things with the part studio, but as things grow, you know, a bicycle, part studio, do your assemblies there. What I'm talking about is a plant full of robots, and I have to control the workflow through the assembly plant. I mean, I'm talking large assemblies here, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what ends up happening in context or designing in the assembly is that the first thing that you'll do with a top level assembly is you'll start mapping out your layout and where everything's going to go. And then what you're going to do is you're going to start establishing your datums on where the robotic cells are going to be, where they're going to belong. And basically what you're doing is you're mapping where the product flow is through your factory. Those are your datums. If you start thinking along those lines, the industry calls those skeleton parts, right? So if I was going to build a body, the first thing I'd do is I'd start with putting the skeleton together. And CATIA and ProEngineer both have skeleton parts. And really all it is the concept that I'm going to start in the assembly and I'm going to lay out all of my datums. Because it turns out that to be successful within context, you want to tie things to datums. It's easy to control datums. It's hard to control geometry. And as soon as you start putting your relationships to your datums and start building up these datum structures inside of your top level assemblies, then when you go and you build your geometry, you tie it to the actual datums. So in your top level assembly, you can move it and your piece of equipment will move because the equipment ties into the piece of, to the datum. There are some examples. You got to have a pretty big assembly, and then it starts controlling that big assembly becomes pretty important. the first thing I do in a top level assembly that's going to be a fairly good size is I'll start controlling the assemblies. And I draw little boxes. I'll take that box, put it into an assembly, and I'll ship that off to the engineer, and I'll say, here, you stay inside this box. And then I'll go and I'll do the same thing for another engineer, and Bradley's going to go through all of this stuff. Nobody gets to start with a blank slate. Everybody starts with something that was derived from the top level assembly and your datums of some kind. And
Bill, I know you probably said this. The whole idea of context, I mean, you're using it in a very powerful way, but the idea of context in general is to avoid what SolidWorks has, right? Where everything updates all the time in the assembly.
yeah.
And so now you have that you have staged updates. And more importantly, you can have where the intent was, you might have geometry, a single part, but it might be related to parts in the assembly, but those parts might be in different positions, like a door stop, at the two different extremes and stuff like that. So it's something that you actually can't do in other systems, so there's a lot of ways to use it, but the idea is actually something pretty unique.
Yeah, I think Joe brings up a good point. In most of the design in assembly type systems, everything's updating continuously. And that really gives you unpredictable results, and it's a pain in the ass, really. It's a double-edged sword. I don't like having to update the context all the time, but it really saves, because most of the time I don't want it to update. I want to be in control. Maybe that's the problem, right? I want to control it. And I want to control when the context updates. But I would like a update all context button.
You're going to see a lot
Definitely.
of work in this area. So I think, it's nowhere near being done. So
Yeah. It's a great start. It's a little different because, right, the assembly goes to the part as opposed to you editing in the assembly. Who cares? I would like to change the level of transparency so it's more opaque than transparent, because a lot of times I want to be working in the ghosted part studio. But for the most part, I think in context in Onshape is really well done. Some people say that they do it. Everybody calls themselves top-down designers. I don't think it really matters until you start getting very large, complex projects, much bigger than a bicycle. I mean, right now a lot of people are designing bicycles. We design fixtures. So, I mean, how big is that? Until you want to put all the fixtures, everything that's inside the room, problem with the clean room is space is very expensive. So they shove all these fixtures together in one little area. How am I going to represent that? And now we're starting to talk about in context, setting up the datums, have each datum for the fixtures, and then I can start manipulating the datums and all of the fixtures will start updating. There are some pieces of equipment that I've designed. I've set up the datums, and I'll see if I can't bring up some examples on that topic. One of the things that was interesting, because we had a large machine that made a tube, many different pieces of equipment, and the datums were established where the tube was, down the center of the tube, horizontal pass line, vertical pass line. These were essential pieces for each piece of equipment. Those are our skeleton datums in a top-level assembly that we pass down to all the sub-assemblies. The interesting point is that most people will say, oh, here's the ground, let me make that a datum, but you don't know where the ground's going to be. Right? So the ground is defined by the tallest piece of equipment. And then we had an assembly that was in context that would compute the lengths of all the other pieces of equipment. So it was very easy to be able to change where the ground was. And these are things that if you set them up, you can get predictable change at a very high level, at a very top level. Bradley, I'm eating into your time, buddy. You better take over.
It's fine. This actually does really relate to kind of my conversation, so I love it. I put a link in the chat from a company called SolidSmack. I think we do paid post by them. They do a great one talking about Onshape's in context. They also do a great one talking about our multi-part studios. I think just the language they use is really good at explaining and helping people understand where it's coming from, especially from like a SolidWorks or a traditional CAD perspective. Can you guys see this slide deck? Even when I switch screens?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Oh, no,
Okay.
the slides go away when you switch over.
Yeah, but then you can see the Onshape, right?
Yes. Yep.
Perfect. So first of all, glad to see a lot of familiar names and faces. Evan, I think it's your 4-year anniversary in the forum, so congrats on
Thank
that.
you. Yeah.
For those that don't know me, my name is Bradley Solon. I'm a technical services engineer here at Onshape. I started out doing pre-sales demonstrations, so your classic sales application engineer. Since Onshape was pretty small, I quickly graduated into the post-sales, working with Jocelyn on building our customer support structure on the back end. That led into things like you see today with our learning center, our larger team that we have now, and I've been lucky enough to really onboard a lot of people and a lot of customers, especially as we're trying to figure out how Onshape fits and works because of our unique approach to getting things done. Theo, unfortunately, was a victim of me switching back to the pre-sales side. I'm now a manager of the pre-sales demo team. I believe John Desley is working with you, so hopefully he's doing a good job. If not, I can yell at him for you. But it's really good to see everyone to have a conversation here today. One of the big things I want to touch on and start out with the first is I have the slide deck. We're probably not going to cover everything. I'm a big fan of links and resources. You're not going to remember half the shit I say. So what you can do is find all the links here that'll point you in the right direction. I want to talk about project organization in Onshape. This really starts with the core of how Onshape was created. So first link right in the opening slide is understanding versions in history. These are all technical briefings or quick webinar posts to other things. So you guys will have links to click on. But if you don't understand how Onshape works in terms of versioning, branching, tracking data, then this is really going to be a tough conversation. So that's kind of your table stakes to really get going. The 5 main topics, we're probably not going to get to all of them, but the 5 main topics I'm going to cover today are some examples I have of project structure organization, tips for easier searchability of parts, strategy for organizing items for reuse, my personal thoughts on documents and folders and their future, and then some of the implications that are newer improvements of where used in our new partner apps like OneIPM. OneIPM have really helped in this era. The reason why I have all these together is because they are very interrelated. When we get into project structure organization, the question always comes in, oh, well, I designed this one part with my partner, but actually now we need it in a new project. Do we rip it out of that project or do we put it? So kind of the reusability of parts becomes important. And then also, well, I need to go back to that project from 3 weeks ago, but Evan was the one that worked on the design I'm looking for. How do I search it? How do I find it? So all these things are kind of interrelated. I could easily spend a full hour diving into each of the bullet points. So hopefully I can at least get your guys' interest rolling with what we have going on today. So first, in terms of just examples of project structure organization, we really need to talk about inside of a document and then outside of a document. For newer people, just getting into organizing data within Onshape, we have a 10 essentials tips just to help prevent you from getting trapped in a hole of having like 100 million tabs in one document, right? So one of the things I actually want to show off is one of my personal projects I'm working on over my shoulder here. Since we're all work from home, I decided to build a standing desk that can house my 3D printer and some other accessories. So this is one personal project that I'm working on individually. And it definitely shows that even though I work for Onshape, I've been here for 5 years, I still do bad practice as well. So I want to let you guys see kind of how I personally work, even though what I say, it might be slightly different. It's still pretty good in terms of an organization structure, but there's definitely a lot of work that could be improved if I were to say invite Joe Dunn to help me out here. First and foremost, if you ever have more than one person helping you, or even if you're working independently, immediately create a dev branch from start. This will save your life on a lot of headaches, on a lot of things. Merging back and forth is an important aspect when you get into projects, and doing so rapidly and iteratively. When you get into actual companies creating products for release, revision management, release management is going to be the thing that locks down something and says it's good to go. So you don't have to worry about merging back and forth a lot at that aspect, because your release will be the thing that tells you, this is what I care about, this is what I'm looking at. This is just so you can kind of get out of each other's way. You have a parallel branch to say, oh, Bill's in this working with me. Let me go off to a branch really quick so I'm not stepping on his toes. Onshape marketing shows off a lot of good things with collaboration. There are times where it can actually hold you up just because you might be working on the same part, or you might be working in the same assembly or sub-assembly structure that you don't want to get in each other's way on. But still, right, even within one document of Onshape, it still makes sense to be very organized. So in this case, I was creating a base frame. This is going to hold all the structural weight. And then I was going to create a facade around it because I'm crap at woodworking. So I wanted to cover up all my terrible screws and pocket holes as we go through. So I then designed like the enclosure pieces around this component and then all the extra accessories. So I did use in context, speaking to Bill's conversation. And I had a few separate part studios that I then were tying back and forth, and then some reference pieces, so some screenshots from Amazon, my Amazon, shopping list and things like that. And this is a public doc, so you can kind of search it. We'll get into searching later and take a look at it and how it works. But from a project organization standpoint, I just broke it up by subsystem. Each part studio tab was its own subsystem. It could be just one part, which is 2 features, or it can be half the design, where I'm just working on kind of the framing of the wood and then getting ready to put it into the assembly for referenceability. Now, when we talk about more official, more real projects, I have 2 I want to show off. One, most people might have seen already. That's going to be the mountain bike project. For those that have seen it, I promise I won't go into it too deeply, but I will use it for searching a little bit later. But the other one is this wireless speaker. This is a pretty good one because I'm actually improving its organization because we're going to bring it back to life here. But this wireless speaker is designed, it's ready for manufacturing. It has been built in the real world. And it's, very well done from a main assembly standpoint. And even inside this project, it's split up in subsystems, parts, assemblies, drawings in a nice way. This was actually well before we had some in context editing and things like that. So you'll see a lot of the same variables at the top of each of the feature trees. But in this case, something like this project, I can be working on, the rear plate cover with the rear, outboard chip, while Joe could be working on, the internal cavity that's holding the actual structure of my stack. So we can be working together and then referencing the same top level assembly to then check our work. And this is without using versioning and branching to jump back and forth. So there's kind of 2 ways to approach it within one specific document. But then when you get to a larger project that expands beyond a document in Onshape, this is again where planning ahead might be important as you go. I think one of the things I talk about is kind of that balance of pre-planning versus iteration and cleaning up after the fact. We've all had those scenarios where we're deep in a project. Crap, I should probably start to split this out, part this out, bring it into their own documents and spaces. That's where I think Onshape's very forgiving. Don't stress too much about the pre-planning side, but it is still very, very important because we're not file-based. We don't care about your folder path or file name. We're very forgiving if you want to move something to a new document, go and clean up your part studio tree because maybe you want to, reference out a specific part in that multi-part design. But we can do so in a clean way, and then especially with our new replace instances, swap it back into that top level or subassembly pretty easily as we go. On the flip side, though, a little bit of pre-planning doesn't hurt. So this is a doc I've actually helped, I created based off of some work I was doing with a vehicle company. So the idea is to start to think about what systems you have today. And this was actually a migrated project from SolidWorks to Onshape. So we went to the whiteboard, we said, okay, how is your vehicle design set up today? All right, so you have your chassis team, your engine team, your body team, your suspension team, perfect. How do those people interact and link? So we even started mapping out the sharing permissions and how those teams got involved. And this started to create the structure for how we started to create our Onshape project. I will admit our enterprise offering does make this really easy because we have very literally named projects to get it done. I tend to focus more on the professional side because those are the people I'm mostly talking to. So in my rework of this wireless project, I'm starting from scratch. my main frame, I'm very master model approach for most of my designs. So my main idea is going to be the master envelope controls everything. This is the outer bounds of the cylindrical speaker. Everything needs to get packed internally. So this is always going to be referenced, derived, or used in context in every other document or part studio I'm referencing. So when I go back here, this is kind of my feeder, and it's going to be referenced into all of these. So when we talk about that master model design, we do have a good tech briefing on it that walks through some of the structures and strategies for how to reference something back to the top level assembly. Maybe you have a project manager for larger teams that is the person that controls that document and signs off. Across documents, the power for Onshape is the fact that we have linked documents. So when Evan's working on the front of the speaker and I'm at the top level assembly, when he pushes a release or a version, he might not have edits to that top level assembly. So I choose when it updates. We get that update notification. I'm the one that says, yep, I'm the project manager. It looks good. I then choose to go and update it and have that control path. Same thing for release management. You can accept or reject the release and then update as well. So those control points make it really powerful to actually work as a team in Onshape and have it structured in place. Of course, the big trade-off here is you're going to spend time in the beginning pre-planning, thinking through how it's structured and set up, but it might not always work out that way, as we all know. So there's room for error as we go. Bill, were you saying something? You're on mute.
It wasn't important. I said it never goes the way you think it's going to. It's always
No. And so really it comes back to just the way Onshape's structured is we're just going to be very forgiving as you go, so you can easily roll back and recover from what's going on. But again, the ways you have things set up, I'm definitely very sub-assembly, subsystem focused, but it could be based on team, based on electronics and sheet metal and things like that. I'd be curious, actually, I don't want to call people out, but I'd be curious to see some of the users here show off any of their projects if they ever could. That'd always be fun to see how they structure things. But any questions and kind of general layout and organization for a design? It's really tough from my perspective because every time I talk to a customer, there always is a unique aspect to their use case, which makes us need to get hands-on. I found working with Jocelyn, the best thing we can do is really just a whiteboarding strategy. Let's talk about your project today and how you think about it. Let's lay it out on a whiteboard and how you have it structured in your head. Let's talk about the Onshape's advantages and trade-offs with certain things. And then let's see if we can restructure or set it up appropriately in sort of a pre-planning aspect. It doesn't have to be in the beginning of a project either. It can always be right in the middle of it, at the point of migration, or well deep into like Rev 3 or 4 as you go through it. But also that other side of it is we are very hands-on as a company, so you can always lean on us and reach out if you guys need help with this.
Bradley, in your structure here, you don't talk about datums, and if you got a car, the wheelbase is really important. And then how do you set that up? How do you set up the relationships between the geometries?
So the relationships, I tend to always lean on the common origin. So for those that don't know, right, Onshape has a global coordinate system. That's the giant view cube, and then we can create a local coordinate system between parts. Usually with a master sketch approach or master model approach, that'll define the common origin between all pieces because I'll have that one reference piece to always look at, to always point to. So if we go back to something like the mountain bike, right, so I know that the frame design is always going to be the thing we come back to because this is where we have the top level master sketch. So this is always referenced in every other document. So I always know that this, this center hub is my common origin for everything as we go. And it just so happens out of convenience, I am referencing just the origin of this part studio. And then if I need to change the origin to like the back left of a tire for something, at least I know that's the center point for the overall top level assembly as I move forward. Sometimes, in this case, we didn't. Sometimes I'll even just throw in a mate connector there, have that travel through the entire process structure as we go to make life really easy.
Well, one thing that I find with Onshape is that there are so many choices. The tool is so flexible, it's really hard to decide. I've got multiple parts in a studio, I've got multiple tabs in a document, I've got external documents, there's so many choices and so many ways to go wrong. So I'm sort of looking for some good examples of how to lay things out here.
Yeah, in terms of, I would kind of rethink about it. So there are a lot of choices. I definitely agree with you there. There's a lot of flexibility, and that definitely makes it tough to pinpoint on a decision. You kind of get that paralysis by analysis because there's too much to think about or want to go after. I would push back and say, don't worry about doing anything wrong or having anything break. It's just how you want your hierarchy, right? So this is actually a pretty good reference example. That's why I do lean on it a lot. This is a bike. Everyone knows the size of a bike. This is split across 19 documents. So this is very, very aggressive. In the real world, if I was trying to design this, if I was like Trek, I wouldn't be doing it this advanced or this split out. And this actually does tie into my second topic. So I'll kind of help answer your question and tie into this, the searchability of parts. All of you can find this right now. If you go into Onshape, go to your public folders or your public documents. In the search bar where it says search in public on the dropdown, filter by type for documents. And then in the description, type in April 2019. And you should see, I think there's somebody else's document in there, but you should see all 19. There's going to be one that says main assemblies start here. So out of the millions of public documents, you're able to find this specific one pretty quickly and easily based on, a two-word search, April 2019. Very, very unique, just because people don't use this very often. So click on the start here. You can see on the second tab, the PDF, I give you kind of a screenshot and then direct links to the structure of how it's laid out, just because I can't share you into my enterprise folder as we go through it. But this is the most aggressive way to do it. We have, even the wheels are broken up into their own folder. So if we go to the wheels folder, if you look back at my screen, I can at least show you the folder structure. Even this is broken out quite a bit. Front wheel, rear wheel, standard parts. So just think about your foundation. What do you want your foundation to be? Is it the chassis? Is it the outer sheet metal enclosure? Is it an interstack that holds all the electronic components? Or is it the base of, say, in Bill's example, like a robotic arm? If that's your base, okay, how do we build out from there? So let's say that base, that's one document. Now, if it's like the size of a robotic arm or even a bike, I'd argue it could almost fit into one document. But at what point do we jump from a document or everything in one document to breaking out to another? That's a mix of, and again, going into teams, that's a mix of how many people are involved so that you get that balance of collaboration, but then also being able to go heads down, leave me alone, don't bug me, I'm busy. So if it's, two people working on a smaller project, maybe it's just two documents and it's just the crap they work on. And then maybe you have a third document that's a top level assembly where they bring everything together, organize their sub-assemblies and structure. So, these are very cut and dry and structured for, our marketing screenshots and things like that. But realistically, I would probably have this mountain bike in five documents. I'd have it with the 4 people that were working on it, and then one for the top level for the project manager to go and create the sub-assemblies, organize it. And that's like the checkoff document. That's where, after it gets released and approved, I do another double check as I made everything, check for my interferences as we go, and then ship it off. I'd be curious to hear Joe's thoughts on that as well. I'm roping you in.
No, I mean,
just from like choosing when to go from a document to multiple documents, right? Like you're working on something.
I've got worse practices than you, Bradley. I put everything in one document, so that's what I'm doing.
Don't tell them that.
Yeah, me too.
But what I do tell, and by the way, I do a ton in a part studio, so I'm even worse. But you do have versioning, right? So I think the big one that I usually tell people is, keep in mind, a version is per document. So when you version something, you're versioning everything in the document. And when you want things to be independent and have independent versions, that's when you want them in different documents, right?
That's actually a great thing to bring up. And I almost forgot to mention it, but that's a very important aspect too, right? It always goes back to what is Onshape based off of? Onshape's based off of data that can be timestamped, dated, and versioned and branched off of. So to Joe's point, on top of these 2 things I mentioned of when you're working with other people, do you want to be stepping on each other's toes or not? And then do I care if it is versioned or branched altogether? Those are good deciding factors on when you should start to split things out, move on to a new document. And you can always make this decision when you're halfway into the project. Again, you can always right click, move a tab to a new document, split it out. Oh crap, I realized I want this rear wheel to have its own version history so I can look at it better later and kind of follow it better. That's fine. You're probably still in the middle of iterating, or you're only a few releases in. If not, if it's like a big mistake and you're like, 2 years later you want to do this, throw in a PDF like I have in a lot of my documents. Throw in a PDF and like big bold letters, just say this was moved, see the current history in this doc. And, you can add links, PDF links are clickable, as you can see in that public example. And then, find older history here. And even when we get to searchability, right, I can go in Onshape and search, and we'll even pick between the two for you. So if you've never done this in your Onshape account, just in a general search, and if you use release management, just look at all the recently released things. Just keep it very broad, see what comes up. You might be surprised by what shows up, you might not. But if you have a document that was moved from one document to its own, you'll actually see it in two places, especially if it was released from both. You can kind of start to track that and see that very easily. So Onshape makes it really nice. And this is part of my, this is why I have all these topics tied together about my thoughts on documents and Part Studios to begin with.
I mean, the other thing is, at some point, there's just too many tabs in a document too, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah,
the more parts and the more things you have, the more you're going to want to break them out, because it just navigating in tabs becomes a little bit crazy.
If all else fails, reference back to the 10 essential tips. This will always help guide you if you're struggling to make a decision. We just picked numbers and went for it just based on what we've seen and talked to customers. So nothing's really scientific or will affect the product very much, but it's just patterns and things we've noticed. So if you're struggling, okay, for my part studio, is it more than 10 unique parts? Oh, it is? Maybe I should look at creating a new part studio. For my document, am I reaching 20, 40 tabs? Okay, I might look at splitting out into a new document. And then you can start to really, maybe that'll be the push you need to help you find the structure you're looking for. And again, don't worry about these links or grabbing these. These are all in the presentation that Bill will have access for you guys. That kind of leads into the following tip or point. Searching and finding parts, right? Now that we've broken things out, we have this project that's not within one document anymore. How do we find and look for parts? Based on what I've seen with usage for Onshape, I found that you really only need 3 data points to be able to very quickly and easily find a part you're looking for. I may be wrong. This is just my personal experience from working with people and in my own projects. A name, a part number, and something else. That's really all you need. You're probably going to remember one of those, even if it's half of a description. If you look at the example we walked through, you guys finding the mountain bike, that's only part of the description that I used for it. So if we go back here and I go and look at the details, the document description is Onshape Public Access Organizational Example, April 2019. I'm not going to remember that whole sentence, but if you remember part of it, you can search it based on your own personal Onshape folder or database. You're probably going to find it pretty quickly or even filter it out. If you remember just a letter in the name, again, Onshape will filter it even more to make it very easy to start to pinpoint things that you're looking at. So as you start to split out these documents, as you get concerned about trying to find things as you go, all you really need is 3 kind of contact points to be able to find it. And you're going to hit the ground running and be very successful and not struggle too much in it. A lot of people tend to bring up, oh, well, my company has 250,000 parts. You're probably not going to have access or be shared into all of them. Of course, if you're the admin, that's a different conversation that I can have with you guys. But that's where we get into kind of using labels and teams as you go through it. So personally, I love labels. Labels can be used in a lot of different ways. This is kind of for managing your own desk as you go, just to be able to split out things that you're currently working on. And we do make it pretty easy to add labels to things. So I can go into this document or this, oops, that's a bad folder. I can go into this folder, oops. I can go to this folder. I can shift select everything and then tie labels to everything. So now if I come back after vacation, all right, what have I completed? We now see all those wheel wells get added in here, ready for me to go and reference and look at. So for your own personal space, these labels are huge. No one else in your company sees this. This is just for you. So you might not agree with how the business has a folder organized or structured. You might not be happy with kind of how things are laid out. That's fine. Create labels, kind of structure it on your own. Create it for yourself in your own space so that you're not having issues finding it. And then again, very quick and easy to grab things and get going if you need to. Don't underestimate searching releases and metadata. The biggest thing in the searching is results from. You can do all or latest. If you're looking for an older release or version, do all. If you just want the latest version of something, keep it at latest. Oh, I just did something, I can't quite remember it, leave it at latest. And you can even specifically call out versions. So those bottom two drop boxes in search are a huge lifesaver. I've always done really dumb things and kind of completely forgot or lost something and found it in 2 seconds because of this feature. I just did a version of something somewhere. Let me go look for it. Versions in workspace is like the loosest search, but I want to look for something with the version. Again, using those tactics of if you know part of the name, if I just know that there's a letter A in there, and if I know that there's a description of like 2019 somewhere, what can I find? This might not bring up anything because I'm looking in a specific folder. I always kind of get stuck on that. Let's see if I can find anything. So let's look for a version all with A in the name and 2019 in the description. Will I get anything? Probably not.
How about just searching for bike? B-I-K-E.
Yes, that's a great one. So top level. Here, let's kind of reset the search.
I want you to find it.
I might have a few bike examples, but so we have our bike frame, mountain bike brochure, and these are all public things that I have access into.
Yeah.
And then, okay, am I looking for a document for bike or a specific part now? And now we're starting to narrow it down. So there's the road bike surface model, there's a bike bearing, and there's a bike frame. The reason why I'm not finding that public example is because I don't actually own it in this business. If I was in the business that I owned it in, it would pop right up right here. But this is for my Onshape. I don't actually have edit access to that.
Is there a way to search for a folder?
Unfortunately not. Huge improvement request. I have we have a Christmas list for employees internally, and this is definitely one of them. We can search types. Why isn't folder a type? That gets into my thoughts on folders and documents. I personally believe in the future, folders and documents might not exist, not even documents. Like a part just has its own version and history to it. And because we're a database, you can kind of just easily see with where you used how everything connects. Even one IPM really does a good job showing that today. So I'm running out of time, so I'm trying to just jam it all together. You guys will see this for parts for reuse. Trust how versions and history work. Trust the in context process. This really ties into how Bill was showing off in context. If you need to pull a part out because it's being reused, that's fine. You were probably doing it in the part studio because it had to reference something. Pull it out, copy the part studio, delete everything but that part, throw it back in there and do an in context edit. That way it can be reused. It can be in context in 2 places if you need it. But then you can start to use a release management version and history to manage it a lot better. Again, back to Joe's point, it needs probably to be separately managed, so it makes sense to try to pull it out. In some cases, you might not be able to pull it out. That is okay. It'll be a little bit confusing, especially if you struggle with the version history to begin with. But if you do a good job understanding versions in history, just having it get released in one project for another one, that's not too big of a deal as long as you name things correctly and define it in the right way. But kind of going back to your point, with folders and the implications of where used, we might not need to care about those things pretty soon. Kind of more on the folders thing and documents disappearing. That's like my 10-year vision of Onshape reading our minds and doing the designs for us. But that's a whole different story. This is me taking the employee hat off. But like every individual component should have its own versions in history and design space. I think that's what makes Onshape great about the system. So if we could get that granular with controlling the history of a design, what does that mean for organization to begin with? Well, if I know how things are interlinked and I know that this assembly uses this part, okay, now where else is this part used? And I just get a tree graph of, where everything is referenced and located. Why do I care how it's organized? I can just follow my trail, find the part I need, hit the ground running, or I need to search for something. Maybe it could be a descriptive search. We have a few interesting projects with some universities with deep learning and just AI being able to find things based on the description, even though it's not actually manually typed in on the designer part. So there is a lot of power behind this, especially because we're just living in a giant database.
Yeah, we can get rid of the file-based stuff and let's go with more of a engineering graphical representation.
Yeah.
With you. When's that? Next week? That's
next week. I'll talk to the developers. They'll love me for it.
Promised by Christmas. I think I heard that.
Hey,
yeah.
Merry Christmas. With that, thanks for showing up. And let's all keep in touch. Let's come up with the perfect project structure. Okay?
Sounds good.
Okay, thanks for coming, guys.
Thank you for hosting. Thanks for the tips.
You betcha.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye. Nice seeing you, Teresa.
Bye. Have a good Christmas.
Yeah, you too.
Good night, and thank you for hosting. Good to see you.
It was good seeing you.